guys, it's Mo, and we're gonna see how this works. I have, well, Appalachian American sort of figured out this kind of hillbilly hillchuck thing. So this is the current project I am working on, just as a sort of fun thing because it keeps my hand busy and I'm not snacking, which is always good. And we are going to watch the Karen Read opening statements because I've heard that the defenses is awesome and the state's, well, the state leaves some to be desired, if you will. What I will say is I don't know much about this case. I kind of stayed out of it. I'm fully in Delphi stuff, and I could not take another case on. I have had to learn that I can't jump on every case and be very in depth on it. Baker's done a great job. Be ready to swear. After I just talked to my doctor, I am this close to welding school. I'm telling you. But I'll be okay with cursing. So chat can tell me if I'm wrong, but the basic premise of this is that why did the other cops not like him, I guess was my question, because I understand that she's proffering that the cops, unalived him with blunt force trauma, usually delivered by their knuckles, and that the state thinks that she backed into him, but why were the other cops mad at him? Or was it just like a spin the bottle, who gets a smackdown? Because I am confused. All right, let's get into this. I do have everything boosted. Is that man doing duck lips? This is terrible. All right. Is it just going to be, oh, ceiling fan?
Superior Court, within and for the county of Norfolk, draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth and this good court. Thank you. May you see the court now in that discussion.
I already love that the closed captionings cannot understand Boston. They're like, what in the hell is he saying? Blessed be the closed captions, for they make all the hilarity.
Okay, good morning, jurors. Jim, yeah.
I'm sorry, jurors, could you stand one more time and raise your right hands?
Dang it.
Do each of you solemnly swear you shall well and truly try the issue between the Commonwealth and the defendant according to your evidence and according to the law, so help you God? You can have a seat. Jurors, hearken to these indictments. 2282 CR 117001, Karen Read of Mansfield in the county of Bristol, on or about January 29, 2022 at Canton in the county of Norfolk, did assault and beat John O'Keefe with intent to murder such person, and by such assault and battery did kill.
On a random note, I was born at Norfolk Naval Base, so I always thought it was very funny when I was a semi-edgy teenager that, where I was born had the sort of F word in it. I was like, yep, I was born effing around.
And murder the said John O'Keefe, and is guilty of murder in the second degree and not in the first degree in violation of General Law, Chapter 265, Section 1. 002, Karen Read of Mansfield, County of Bristol, on or about January 29, 2022, at Canton in the County of Norfolk, did operate a motor vehicle upon a way as defined in Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 90, Section 1, or in a place to which the public has a right of access, or upon a way or in a place to which members of the public have access as invitees or licensees, with a percentage by weight of alcohol in her blood of 8/100ths or greater, or while under the influence of intoxicating liquor, and did so operate said motor vehicles that the lives and safety of the public might be endangered, and by such wanton and reckless conduct so described, did cause the death of another person, to wit, John O'Keefe, in violation of General Law, Chapter 265, Section 13 and a half. 003, Karen Read of Mansfield in the County of Bristol, on or about...
Quick question, but why in the heck isn't murder like the number one, like not subsection 3, paragraph 2, unlawful unaliving? I mean, I would think that would be the first law that you would kind of hammer out when you're making laws. Like, you know what? The big ones, don't don't unalive people, don't do anything to puppies, and live long and prosper. You think that would be the first one, not with many subsections.
January 29, 2022, at Canton in the county of Norfolk, did operate a motor vehicle upon a way or in a place to which the public has a right of access, or upon a way or in a place to which members of the public have access as invitees or licensees, and without stopping and making known her name, residence, and registration number of her motor vehicle, did go away to avoid prosecution or evade apprehension after knowingly colliding with or otherwise causing injury to John O'Keefe, such injuries having resulted in the death of said person in violation of General Law, Chapter 90, Section 24(2), A and a half, 2. To these indictments, the defendant has
Like I understand the reasoning and going over the law, but this is what happens. This is why I can't pay attention, because my mind goes to a bunch of old guys in powdered wigs thinking, ought we make unaliving unlegal? I don't know. Oughtn't we? And, anyway, I'm sharing my weirdness with you. I hope it's not contagious.
pled that she is not guilty and for trial has put herself upon the country, which country you are, and you are sworn to try the issue. If she is guilty, you are to say so. If she is not guilty, you are to say so and no more. Jurors hearken to the evidence.
Thank you very much. Will counsel identify yourselves, please, starting with the Commonwealth.
Adam Lally for the Commonwealth. Good morning, Your Honor.
Morning, Mr. Lally.
Morning, Your Honor. Laura McLaughlin for the Commonwealth.
Good morning, Ms. McLaughlin.
Good morning, Your Honor. Alan Jackson on behalf of Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson.
Good morning, Your Honor. Elizabeth Little, also on behalf of Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Ms. Little.
Good morning, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is David Yannetti, and I represent Karen Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Yannetti. Good morning, Ms. Reed. All right, good morning, jurors. Before we begin, I have to ask you 3 questions that I'm going to ask you every single time we meet.
Sir, I have already had a day. Look, my pain doctor or my psychiatrist was like, wow, I've never heard of anyone swelling with this medication, but that's odd. Also, it must suck when you're in pain and nothing helps. I was like, you are truly a genius at stating the obvious. So that's how that one went, which was not fun-larious, because I was on screen, so I couldn't make funny news or funny faces without, getting sectioned. So I had to keep a straight face.
The first question is, were you all able to follow my instructions and refrain from discussing this case with anyone? Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Were you also able to follow the instructions and refrain from doing any independent research or investigation?
We're going Megan Fox hair talk, but Oli Mazzoli. Okay, ma'am, get some brass reduction purple shampoo and put some of the silver highlights in, and your hair will look phenomenal. Right now, it's a color of yellow that offends me for some reason.
Into this case. Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we were last in court? No. Everyone said no or shook their heads. Thank you. All right, jurors, I'm about to make some preliminary remarks to you to acquaint you with some of the legal principles.
We're not listening to the remarks, because I'm here for the opening. Oh Lord, what is this?
Media or from any other source. It is critical that you follow that instruction, as hard as it's going to be. Finally, please continue to keep an open mouth. Now, I know that you will try this case according to the oath that you have taken as jurors. When you took that oath, you promised that you would well and truly try the issues between the Commonwealth and the defendant according to the evidence and the law. If you follow that oath, approach this case with an open mind and make your decisions fairly and without prejudice, bias, or sympathy for anyone, then you will arrive at a true and just verdict. And that's what we ask of you. So with that, it's time for opening statements, and whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, let's see this guy.
And I ask only that you keep your voice up, please.
What in the John Hughes movie, My Dad Owns the Ski Shop, hairdo is this? He looks like every single douche canoe that is in a John Hughes movie. Did you happen to be played by Kevin Spader? Just asking for a friend.
Do my best, Your Honor. Good morning. So as Your Honor was telling you, this is one of the two opportunities that I will get to address you. The first of which right now, essentially what I'm going to attempt to do, and I know you heard over the course of the impairment process a number of different witnesses that were listed out as far as potential witnesses in this case. So what my intent here is to provide as much of a roadmap as I can
For the love of
those
Cheetos.
waters and help you to navigate
No.
sort of who these people are and what relation they have to this case. We start with John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe grew up in Braintree. He was 46 years old when he passed. He was the son of John O'Keefe Jr. and Margaret or Peggy O'Keefe. He was a brother to Paul O'Keefe and to his sister Kristen Furbush. Kristen was married, and so John's brother-in-law was a man named Stephen Furbush, and they had two children who were very young in 2013. Now in 2013, Kristen unfortunately, tragically passed away, succumbing to cancer in November of 2013. Within months of that, Mr.
I get that this point is to give sort of a spark of life, kind of an idea of who the victim was, but he's doing it in such a he sounds like a kid who's reading a book report, but he doesn't have any passion in it. There was a dog and he went to school and it was great. I mean, this is a giant trial. Wouldn't you have made it sound more natural in that tie? I have questions, but at least you don't have a soul patch, sir.
O'Keefe's brother-in-law and Kristen's husband, Stephen, passed away as well. Now, initially, when John O'Keefe's sister passed away, sort of the initial plan for that situation was that John O'Keefe was going to move in with Stephen Furbush and kids and assist as far as raising them. And then when Stephen passed away a few months after his wife, before those plans could be finalized, John O'Keefe then moved in with his niece and nephew and assumed the parental role and assumed legal guardianship with respect to both of those children. Now, he was assisted in this by a great number of people within the town of Canton where the Furbushes lived and where John moved into, the home with the two children there. There were other parents within the neighborhood, other parents within the children's age group. You'll hear from a number of them over the course of this trial, but they include Mrs. Carrie Roberts and Mrs. Jennifer McKay. They helped Mr. O'Keefe out during those initial stages and during the time.
I do have a question for the chat. Are these names that he's calling out right now that don't seem to be involved in the incident, are these names that I should know? Are these big witnesses? I feel like, again, and it might be that I'm just hypercritical and I'm kind of not here, but if this is meant to pull on my heartstrings, he's delivering it in such a way that I am not moved. I understand and grasp the gravity of the situation, but the way he's delivering it, it's very wooden. And you'd think he would practice this. I mean, at least Daryl Brooks tried to pretend cry.
That he assumed this role. He also got help from his wife. John O'Keefe was a proud member of the Boston Police Department, had been for many years. He had been a patrolman prior to moving in with the children and assuming this sort of role. Boston Police Department helped him greatly as far as positioning him into more of a desk role, working in the sex offender unit with more regular hours to sort of assimilate himself to this new life and this new role that he assumes with these children. Initially, John O'Keefe lived in the house with the kids. However, in 2018, they moved into a new home, sort of a new home that they could have as their own. That home is located also within the town of Canton, sort of on the Stoughton side of Canton at One Meadows Avenue. John O'Keefe raised these children, assuming guardianship for them for about 8 years. His niece, who was the elder of the two, was about 14 at the time that John O'Keefe died, and his nephew was about 11 years old at the time that John O'Keefe died. January.
I will stop here and say that it is very sad for this family, regardless of how I feel the state performs or anything. I do grasp that this family has lost not only a daughter, but a son-in-law, and now a son. So the suffering of the officer's family, John O'Keefe, I can't imagine. And I'll keep them in my thoughts and prayers, even though I am the world's worst Christian. So maybe I'll just tell God to leave them be.
28th, 2022. It was a relatively typical day. It was a Friday going into a Saturday of January 29th. Sort of typical in the sense of most sort of suburban parents. There were a lot of activities, weekend sports, practices, games, things of that nature that the O'Keefe and Furbush family had to look forward to. One little difference when it came to that particular day of January 28th and the 29th is the weather. So there had been predicted, and there was going to be a snowstorm, an insignificant one. A blizzard essentially was coming in overnight that Friday and the Saturday.
Then why the hell were they out drinking? I am confused. Why were they not getting their Midwest essential snow-in items? You got your bread, your eggs, your milk to make French toast, all the Mountain Dews for reasons Midwest, and then the cheesy poofs. But they're out bar hopping? I mean, maybe they're more comfortable driving in snow. I am not at all comfortable, but I raise questions.
Saturday, lasting through most of the day on Saturday the 29th. And as a result of that, most of those sort of typical, weekend routine activities that would keep most people, including
like
those within the town, Canton busy.
I have not been paying attention to this case, so I might ask really dumb questions. But, so does the Midwest. Look, I have a stockpile in case I get snowed in.
Have been canceled ahead of time. Everybody knew what was coming. Everybody knew essentially you weren't going to leave your house all that much the following day. Now, also on January 28th, Mr. O'Keefe had received some news in respect to his niece. So his niece and her best friend were in 8th grade at the time, going into high school in the fall of 2022. They both applied to a private school called Bishop Dean, and they both found out on the 28th that they had been accepted to that school. So
We accept your
friend,
admittance
as
and
well
would
as her
like your
father,
money
a gentleman
now.
by the name of Michael Camerano, who's both he and his wife, Catherine Camerano, were friendly with John O'Keefe. They had children around the same ages as both John's niece and his nephew. And they had come over to their house on Meadows Ave that evening to celebrate the girls getting into that school. The nephew of John, the 11-year-old, was sleeping over a friend's house that night. He left that home sometime around 7 p.m. or so, got picked up and went to sleep over at his friend's house. John O'Keefe and Michael Camerano then decided to travel out to a local establishment on Washington Street called C.F. McCarthy's Bar and Restaurant. You're going to hear testimony, and you're going to see surveillance video, and you're going to see receipts and all kinds of things from a variety of different establishments.
Now I realize who he reminds me of. You know, if you ordered Binger off of Timu, this would be what you got. You'd be like, no, I wanted Binger, defense attorney at law, action figure, pointing force multipliers at the jury, being arrogant and dismissive. And this is who you got. You're like, wait a minute. I have been cheated and bamboozled.
Establishments all sort of located within Camden Center along that strip in Washington Street. Now, they get Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano leave the girls at home. They then go to see if McCarthy is arriving there sometime between 7:30 and 8 p.m. They eventually cajole another friend of theirs, Mr. Kurt Roberts, to come out to the bar and join them as well. And there's some other people that are located within the bar, including a Mr. James Sullivan, who we hear from, who was present at the bar that night as well. Eventually, the defendant, Karen Reed, joins them at this establishment here at McCarthy's, sometime just before 9 p.m. Now, John O'Keefe and Karen Reed had met sometime in 2004. They had dated briefly during that time and reconnected sometime around March of 2020, around the time of the COVID-19 sort of pandemic shutdown. They had started dating around that time period, or reconnected during that time period, and the defendant had stayed at the house in Canton several nights a week. She had helped out with the children. In the month or so leading up to Mr. O'Keefe's death, the relationship soured. You will see text messages between Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed to that effect. You will hear testimony from the children, from John's niece and nephew, in regard to things they observed within that relationship. And you'll hear testimony from other individuals as far as their observations or things that they heard. Turning to January 29th, 2022. Just after 6 a.m., the Canton Police Department receives a 911 call from a woman reporting a male party, subsequently identified as John O'Keefe, found in the snow outside a residence at 34 Fairview Road. At the time, as I mentioned, blizzards that had been predicted was occurring, heavy snow, temperatures in the teens, wind bustling around. Officer
Another probably dumb question for people that have seen a lot of this trial, but you're telling me that he was supposed to show up to a party at a house, and when he said, "I'll be right in," no one went to check on him? Like, he's not coming in? Hey, has anyone checked on Roy? He said he was working with the Donner Party. Maybe he was on the Titanic. I mean, some of this doesn't make logical sense to me. But I tend to be a weird person, so I don't know.
Officer Stephen Saraf and Officer Stephen Mullaney of the Canton Police were dispatched along with Canton Fire and EMS, and you'll hear from them in regard to their response and what they observed on scene.
Interesting.
In particular, with Officer Saraf, he'll have as an exhibit, I anticipate, a cruiser camera video from his cruiser detailing or memorializing sort of his response in the darkness, in the blizzard-type conditions as he's driving from the Canton Police Station, where he was located when he received the call, to 34 Fairview Road. When they arrived there, they observed three females, sort of off to the left side of the property. And when I say the left side of the property, I mean if you're standing out in the street facing 34 Fairview Road, off to the left side of the property, there's a flagpole, there's a fire hydrant, there's some bushes. That is where Mr. O'Keefe is located. On the right side of the property is sort of the driveway and the mailbox, other things that you'll become familiar with through photographic evidence.
Again, this is so wooden and boring, but he could have demonstratives up helping, because while I hear that and I process like it's on the left side, it would be much better to have a visual and say, we aren't showing you the body yet, like they did in the Halderson case. This is as much as you'll see now, but this is where the body was found. I mean, he's doing a good job just putting facts down as he sees it, but if I'm the juror with my advanced ADHD squirrelness, I am totally making fun of his tie and simply writing down what I hear, but I'm not really paying attention. I mean, I would try to.
This trial. The three females that the officers observed there were then identified as the defendant, Karen Reed, Mrs. Jennifer McCabe, who had received a phone call earlier in the morning from the defendant, as well as Mrs. Kerry Roberts, who had also received a phone call early that morning from the defendant. The several firefighters from the Canton Fire Department you'll hear from in regard to their observations of injuries, abrasions, and lacerations to the right arm of Mr. O'Keefe. You'll hear their testimony in regard to swelling of his eyes and other injuries that he observed. They observed redness from the cold that he had been lying out in for some time. You'll hear the testimony from these firefighters, Timothy Nuttall, Anthony Flamati, Matthew Kelly, Francis Walsh, Katie McLaughlin, and Greg Woodbury. And at least from 3 of those firefighters, you'll hear.
Okay, all I heard was a bunch of names, and I'm terrible with names, so I'd have to give them. I usually give people nicknames. That's why I love YouTube, because everyone just goes by nicknames for the most part. And I can remember those. I cannot remember names to save my life.
Your testimony anticipates detailing statements that the defendant made to them when they had asked about the origination of some of those injuries. The defendant stated repeatedly, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Mr. O'Keefe was then taken from the front lawn onto what they call a scoop stretcher. As he's doing that, I anticipate you'll hear Ms. Roberts' testimony that despite the 6 inches of snow approximately that was on top of Mr. O'Keefe's body and the snow throughout the roadway, front yard, everywhere around where he was, there was grass underneath Mr. O'Keefe, where his cell phone was located underneath his body as he lay on that front lawn. He was then transported by firefighters Kelly, Flamati, and Nuttall, as well as the ambulance being driven by firefighter McLaughlin to the Good Samaritan Medical Center. Once there were some observations, and you'll hear testimony from Dr. Justin Rice from that facility as far as observations consistent with what I anticipate you'll hear from those firefighters. But then there is a certain warming procedure that they go through trying to bring his body temperature up. Because when Mr. O'Keefe arrives at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, his body temperature is 80. And after those resuscitative efforts prove unsuccessful, Mr. O'Keefe is eventually pronounced by Dr. Rice at approximately 7:50. Shortly after that, when the defendant is then being driven away from the scene by Ms. Roberts, who is now going to go pick up Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe, John O'Keefe's parents in Braintree, and then bring them to the Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton, the defendant makes some statements of self-harm. As a result of that, she's then transported to the Good Samaritan Medical Center as well by 2 firefighters named Daniel Whitley and Jason Becker. And amongst the statements that they gained from the defendant as they're having a conversation with her in regard to that, in regard to her treatment and diagnosis, she indicates that the last that she saw Mr. O'Keefe, they had gotten into an argument before he had gotten out of the car in front of Fairview Road. Now, you'll also hear testimony from some of the other first responding officers from the Canton Police Department, including Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, Sergeant Sean Good, and Sergeant Michael Lentz, in regard to their initial response, their observations, people that they spoke to, where they went, and their ability to recover within these blizzard conditions that are still on.
Okay, so how many notes do you think that the jurors took about who these people are? Again, if I am a juror and I lean towards the defense, but I want to keep an open mind on this, him throwing out these names to me doesn't mean much. If he had told it like a story, a couple goes to a bar, there's an impending blizzard, they get into a fight, his girlfriend backs into him, and here are the people that you are going to learn about. Why am I being the voice of reason? A crazy redhead who wears wigs on the internet should not be in charge of reason.
Ongoing, certain pieces of evidence that they located in around the area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found. You'll also hear from Lieutenant Charles Ray of the Canton Police Department, who was tasked with, at this point in time, the Canton Police were unaware that the nephew was over at a sleepover. They were unaware that Mr. Camarado had come over to the residence on Meadows Ave and picked up the niece and bringing her back to his house as she was left unattended when the defendant left to go looking for Mr. O'Keefe. So unaware of that, they go do a well-being check at approximately 8:22 in the morning. And they also have cruiser camera video attached to their cruiser. You'll see that video and when they pull into the driveway at Meadows Ave, approximately 8:22 in the morning, they pull in directly behind where eventually you'll hear Ms. McCabe left the defendant's vehicle after driving it from her house to Meadows Ave in search of Mr. O'Keefe. And you'll have that footage, and you'll be able to see the back of the defendant's vehicle, specifically the right rear taillight of that. Now, you'll also hear testimony, as I mentioned, from the Cameranos, from Mr. Roberts, from Mr. Sullivan. They were all present with the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe at C.F. McCarthy's. You'll hear testimony from a number of other individuals who were at the Waterfall. The Waterfall is a bar located across the street, essentially, from C.F. McCarthy's on Washington Street in Canton Center, and somewhere that Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant went after leaving C.F. McCarthy's at approximately 11 p.m. Now, from that establishment, you'll hear from Rebecca Traers, who was working as a bartender at the Waterfall that evening. You'll hear from a couple named Nicholas and Karina Polakaitis, who were friends of friends, who had known Mr. O'Keefe through their daughter around the same age as Mr. O'Keefe. Mrs. Polakaitis had some conversation with the defendant that evening, as well as herself and Mrs. McCabe at the Waterfall.
Hello,
She left around the same
Kettletown.
time as they did. She parked on Washington
Welcome,
Street
everyone.
around the same area as Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed did, specifically in Ms. Reed's car. And she observed Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant walking toward the defendant's vehicle, and specifically the defendant walking towards the driver's side. Now, you'll hear testimony from a Christopher and Julie Albert, who were people who were at one point neighbors of Mr. O'Keefe. They knew him well from being neighbors of him. Christopher Albert owns a pizza shop, also located within that Cannon Center area. Mr. O'Keefe, earlier in the day on the 28th, had been into that pizza shop along with his nephew to get his nephew a slice. Christopher Albert and Mr. O'Keefe had some conversation regarding what they were doing that night, and it's Christopher Albert who actually texts Mr. O'Keefe and indicates that they're over at the Waterfall and that he should come over shortly before Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant make their way from C.F. McCarthy's home. Now, Christopher Albert left directly from the Waterfall and went home. He was sort of walking distance away from them. His wife, Julie Albert, had left earlier in the evening. There was a band playing at the Waterfall that night. Julie Albert started to get a migraine, and she left before most of the group. Included within that group, and sort of
Poor
how
guy, he's gonna
they
get home
came
from
to
the bar and she
Waterfall, the
still
Albert
has a
family
headache.
in particular. Julie Albert
Ba-dum-chum.
went there along with her sister-in-law, Nicole Albert, as well as her niece, Caitlin Albert, her niece's boyfriend, and Mr. Tristan Morris, and they had had dinner at the Waterfall earlier in that evening. Now, Nicole Albert lives at 34 Fairview Road. She has a husband named Brian Albert.
I know. I am pretty much just waiting for the defense to come up because, holy Bob, this is boring. And it's boring in a way, like I say, I have a hard time remembering names. So if I don't see a picture and I don't give them a nickname of sorts, I don't know. And again, how can you make a hit and run in the middle of a blizzard is what you're contending happened. How do you make that boring? How do you make that sound like my fourth period trigonometry? How do you do that? It's terrible. And I will say again, I am so sorry to the O'Keefe family. The amount of tragedy they've had in the last couple of years, it's just heartbreaking. But right now, the state isn't doing very well, in my opinion, at least in getting me engaged, getting me ready, and kind of giving me the framework. He's given me a lot of names, but they don't mean anything yet.
Who's also a Boston police officer. Brian Albert had gone with a friend of his, who's also in law enforcement, a man named Brian Higgins. And they had gone separately, but had come home together from a funeral for a fallen police officer in New York City. They came home early to sort of beat the weather, and eventually they meet up with Brian
there,
Albert's family
Tammy.
at the Waterfall. Now, Tristan Morris, who was Caitlin Albert's boyfriend, had left the Waterfall at some point in the evening. He then returns later to the residence on Fairview Road and picks up Caitlin Albert, brings her home. All of this is in relation to Brian Albert and Nicole Albert's son, Brian Albert Jr. whose birthday was coming up the following day, the day of the snowstorm on the 29th. So he had been back at the house at 34 Fairview while his family was out at the waterfall. He had a number of friends that had come over that evening to celebrate his birthday with him. Now, among those friends was two individuals named Sarah Levinson and Julie Nagel, and they were at the residence at 34 Fairview for a good portion. Now, those individuals from the waterfall that leave and then come to 34 Fairview, they do so sometime shortly after midnight. Shortly after midnight is when it starts to snow. Flurries are starting to come down. Snow is starting to stick to some degree to roads, to the front lawns, grassy areas around the town. Now, from that group, the group that goes back is obviously Brian Albert and Nicole Albert, as they live there. Caitlin Albert.
Other question. So I understand that under his body was just grass, maybe indicating or indicative of him, having been unalived early in the evening before the snow started. But couldn't he also have melted the snow with just his body temperature? I mean, if we are going on that as the sole time period sort of clue, did anyone think about the body temperature? I don't know. These are the weird things that I think about all the time.
Because it's her parents and her boyfriend is picking her up, as well as Jennifer McCabe, who is Nicole Albert's sister, and her husband, Matthew. They go back to that, and there's an open invitation to essentially anybody that's there.
See, that makes
John
sense
O'Keefe
to
takes
me.
them up on that. There's certain text messages and phone conversations between John O'Keefe and Jennifer McCabe as to where this house is located, as he's never been there before. And then he and the defendant drive in the defendant's vehicle to 34 Fairview. And once there are several witnesses from within the home that observe the vehicle parked in. So I mentioned earlier there were two females that were with Brian Albert Jr. at the house, one of them being Julie Nagel. At some point, she had called her brother, Mr. Ryan, for a ride home. He then gets a ride from his friends, Ricky DiAntonio, as well as Mr. Nagel's girlfriend, Heather Maxson, that's riding in the back of Mr. DiAntonio's.
Jumpin' giblet jalapeno. Does anyone drive their own damn car in this story? What the heck? I mean, I'm already overloaded by names, but this is like the third time I've heard someone just not driving their car and getting a random car from somewhere. What in the schnell?
Pickup truck. I say that because they arrive at Fairview Road around the same time as the defendant. The defendant is coming in from one direction, the pickup truck with the Nagel brother is coming in from another direction. The pickup truck with the Nagel brothers riding in flashes its light, signaling the defendant to go. She goes first, they follow in behind, and lo and behold, they end up at the same house. They park the pickup truck somewhere in that right side of the property, facing it from the street in the area of the driveway, and the defendant in her black Lexus SUV parks a little bit further up. Different people from within the pickup and different people from within the house observe that Lexus SUV in one location, pull up a little bit further, and then pull up a little bit further until it's in the area of that fire hydrant, of that flagpole, where Mr. O'Keefe is located the following morning. Now, from their position, so I anticipate the testimony that you're going to hear is that Heather Maxson from that pickup truck observes a male passenger and a female operator when the pickup truck operator flashes those lights at the vehicles are facing each other before they pull down Fairview. What you'll hear also, I anticipate, from all three of those individuals in the pickup and Julie Nagel, who comes out to the pickup to talk to the brother, is that no one ever exits that vehicle. There are no footprints around that vehicle. There's no damage that they observed to that vehicle at that time. Again, it's just started to snow. Things aren't sticking really too much at this point. Julie Nagel has a conversation with her brother, decides that she's going to stay at the house longer, so the arrangements for a ride home, and the pickup truck leaves from that point as they pass.
Can we talk about the real crime where the sister called the brother and say, yo, I need a ride? So he woke up another a-hole, and then she's like, when they get there, nah, I want to stay. Can you understand the amount of pissed I would be if you woke me up in the middle of the night right before a snowstorm and made me drive to you little board, and I'm working at the top now, and then I'll show you guys the bottom. I do love this frame. I don't know if it's available anymore because it came from, well, the land of Ukraine. Oh, stop again. But I almost have the bottom bit done. For the love of all that is holy. It has been a most Monday of days here in the Mo house, but we just deal with it. So there is the finished part. I got a little bored, decided I wanted to start on the top. Generally, I don't do that because I'm too type A to live, but this week I was okay with it. I will say my doctor's like, so when did you start getting anxious? And I was like, sir, I have always been what you would call a Woody Allen type child. I was born at 42. I was worried about my IRA. But let's continue with boring guys so we can get to fun people. And I need to switch threads here in just a second. And thank you. These are available. I will put the link in the description. Tapestry Market. They have all sorts of characters, Disney, Sailor Moon, of course, but other anime, Pokemon, things like that. Other funny ones. I mean, they basically have a bunch. I do get the stamped ones because I will go ahead and say that as a chaotic neutral and semi-good, having to count them would be way too difficult for me. And welcome, Rachel Hope Bernstein Egelhart.
They observe a female operator matching what I submit as the description of the defendant. From all of those people within that house that evening, none of them at any point in time observed John O'Keefe come into the house. They see the vehicle out front, they see the vehicle pull away, and they just assume that they left and that no one was coming. Clear testimony from other individuals who were at the house that night, including Colin Albert, who was Julian
Okay,
Christopher.
so no photos of the body in situation, no photos of the site after the body was moved, no video footage of the car in the police garage being searched. What's wrong with these guys? Do they work for Delphi? Do they work for Judge Gull? Because this sounds like stupidity of the highest order. Oh no, Rachel, I hate when I do that. Look, Rachel, just surrender to the Monday and get a glass of wine at your soonest convenience. Or a margarita. You know, it's almost Cinco de Mayo. I say, live life. Live, laugh, love.
Albert's son is
Karen
also
would
the
say.
cousin of Brian Albert Jr., who was having people over for his birthday. He's leaving the house around the time that the initial people coming back from the waterfall, which includes the homeowners, and Mr. Higgins, are sort of coming into the house. At that point, Colin Albert was leaving. He's getting picked up by a young lady named Allison McCabe, who was Jennifer and Matthew McCabe's daughter, who's also friends with Colin Albert and also cousins of Brian Albert Jr., who's within the home celebrating his birthday. As I mentioned, you'll hear testimony from Matthew McCabe and from Jennifer McCabe in regard to their observations that particular evening, both at the waterfall as well as at the
I feel
residence on
seen.
Fairview Road.
Thank
And then
you.
you'll hear testimony in regard to a phone
Original fourth.
call that Jennifer McCabe receives from John O'Keefe's niece at approximately 4:53 in the morning. She answers that phone call, speaks to the niece briefly, and the niece hands the phone over to the defendant. Now, you'll hear testimony from the niece as well, that about 4:30 in the morning or so, the defendant came into her room in a frantic state, saying that Mr. O'Keefe had not come home the night before. So initially, when the defendant is talking to Ms. McCabe, she indicates to Ms. McCabe that the last time she saw Mr. O'Keefe was at the waterfall. Eventually, as Ms. McCabe is waking up, she reminds the defendant that she not only saw them leave the waterfall around the same time as herself, but also saw the vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, outside of the home on Fairview Road. Eventually, the defendant, while driving around, this will come in as far as other testimony and related testimony as it develops, But she's driving around in that morning. She's calling a bunch of number of different people, friends of Mr. O'Keefe. She's calling Mr. O'Keefe himself. She also calls Ms. Roberts. So Carrie Roberts receives a call about 5 a.m. from the defendant indicating that Mr. O'Keefe did not come home, indicating that he got hit by a plow or that he must be dead. Ms. Roberts then gets ready. Mr. McCabe is getting ready as well, sort of planning to go out and look for Mr. O'Keefe and see if they.
I will say, and this is probably not normal, but if there was a lot of death in the family, I think you look, just me personally, and I don't speak for anyone else with grief, but when if Mr. Moe is late 15 minutes or, I don't hear from him, I start preparing myself for that knock on the door. Now, I know that's irrational, and most of the time I know that is not going to be how things play out. He's just late. But if his family had been surrounded by this much tragedy, it's not out of the ballpark that she would feel like this, at least in my opinion. But I am semi-skewed in my thoughts, so who knows?
Located. They call numerous times, and you see that within the text messages and the phone extractions from a variety of people's different phones throughout the course of this trial as well. So eventually the defendant comes to Ms. McCabe's home, indicates at some points prior to that she has a cracked tailgate. Ms. McCabe then gets in the driver's seat due to the defendant's frantic state. Ms. Roberts is there as well. Ms. Roberts follows Ms. McCabe driving the defendant's vehicle back to Mr. O'Keefe's residence in Meadows Ave, checks on the niece. The defendant then shows both Ms. Roberts and Ms. McCabe the damage to her right rear taillight, which is essentially missing a number of different pieces from that right rear taillight. They then proceed off to drive and see if they can locate Mr. O'Keefe. The defendant is insistent that they go to that residence on Fairview Road. Again, they're driving down there in the dark, in the snow, in the wind, in the blizzard. As they approach towards that residence,
Didn't he just claim that Karen said that the last place she remembers being is at the waterfall? So it would seem to me to be a very big, I guess, separation. How did she get from we left the waterfall, that's the last I remember, to you went to this house? Yeah, I've heard that is somewhat normal, but this is just what he's telling me so far gives me some suspicion, but it doesn't get me beyond reasonable doubt. Now, I do want to say that, I tend to lean toward the defense and find the state icky, but that's just me. I am so sorry that you lost your brother-in-law, and at that time, I could not imagine.
there's one person, so they're seated within the vehicle. This is Ms. Roberts' vehicle. She's driving. Mrs. McCabe is in the front passenger seat. The defendant is in the rear passenger seat. The defendant is the only one who sees Mr. O'Keefe. He yells and screams at Ms. Roberts to stop.
Oh, that's good.
Ms. Roberts and Ms. McCabe, I anticipate, will testify that they did not see Mr. O'Keefe, not only as they were driving past him,
That's what I
but even
thought
after they got out of the
from, but-
vehicle until the defendant gets out of the back seat and makes a beeline essentially right over to where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
Uh-huh.
Mrs. McCabe then dials 911, and shortly after that is when the officers and firefighters arrive on scene. Now, while they're waiting there, at approximately 6:23, 6:24 a.m., during a conversation with the defendant asks Mrs. McCabe to look up on her phone how long someone has to be out in the cold to die from hypothermia, or something to that effect. And you'll hear some dispute as to when that search was made. And you'll hear testimony from 3 different forensic extraction experts, Nicholas Carino, Ms. Jessica Hyde, and
Okay.
Ms.
Are they experts or are they cops that went to, a seminar? Because it's getting a little, if I were the defense, I would have an independent person do it. It seems like having the expert also being a police officer who's kind of obligated by the dint of his job to try to put you in prison. There should be a neutral arbiter getting your Cellbrite records. But that's just my thought.
You'll hear about a lot of these things called extraction reports from cell phones. And the extraction reports are done with a program called
Wonderful.
Cellbrite. Mr. Whiffen is someone who writes that software for Cellbrite. I anticipate you'll hear from each of their testimonies that Google search that was done on Ms. McCabe's phone was done at the same time frame that she indicates the defendant requested her to do it, and that at 6:23 and 6:24 morning.
Well, thank you for
You'll
your
hear testimony from Ms. Roberts, Ms. McCabe,
Kiwi
firefighters, and the responding Canton police officers about a repeated phraseology that the defendants stated while there, asking again and again in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, is he dead? Is he dead?
probably.
You will also hear testimony, as I indicated, about sort of treatment that she received at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, and that would involve testimony from Ms. Daisy Hornstep, Ms. Kathleen Wilford, and Dr. Gary Fowler. You'll hear testimony from a number of different analysts from the State Police Crime Lab and from some other laboratories as well. Included within that will be Mr. Nicholas Roberts, and Ms. Maureen Hartnett, Mr. Andre Porto, Ms. Ashley Vallier, and Ms. Christina Handy, those all being from the State Police.
Okay.
You will hear
Being an auditory listener, he does something that really annoys me with his speech. The second to last syllable on any name that he writes or says, he really emphasizes it. If you pay attention, that last syllable right at the end of a sentence when he takes a breath, or second to last, he goes higher on that and then back down. This is what I do when I cannot pay attention because you're so boring.
testimony in regard to an incident which occurred earlier in January, right around New Year's. Mr. O'Keefe, the defendant, and the children have been invited with a much larger group, approximately 70 people or so, to spend New Year's in Aruba. This is a trip that was organized by a friend of Mr. O'Keefe's named Laura Sullivan. We'll hear a testimony from her, as well as from her sister, Miss Marietta Sullivan, as well as you'll hear testimony from the two children in relation to this. And essentially, day 2 or so of this trip, Marietta Sullivan, the sister of Laura, is walking through the lobby and she runs into Mr. O'Keefe. This is someone she refers to as godfather because John O'Keefe is also the godfather of Laura Sullivan's son. Runs into him in the lobby, gives him a hug, and is sort of pointing him in the direction of where she believes he's going into his room. The defendant is in the area. The defendant starts yelling and screaming and swearing at Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan responds in kind. Essentially, for the most part, the Sullivan sisters see very little of Mr. O'Keefe throughout the remainder of their trip to Aruba. And we also hear testimony from the children that shortly after this, or immediately after this, there is an approximately 20-minute screaming match going on between Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant within their hotel room in front of the children.
Okay.
Now, you'll also hear...
This is my big pet peeve. You do not need to bring the children into this. You do not need to bring the children who have lost their parents and now their uncle to make a point that there was a screaming match. You need to drop that because that is leaning on gross and disgusting, in my opinion. These children have already been through enough. If you have enough evidence with the broken tail light, the lack of snow, her beelining over it there, why are you bringing the kids into it? That's slimy and I don't like it at all.
Testimony from the defendant's phone in regard to, from another individual's phone in regard to that Aruba trip. In regard to text messages of an amorous nature that she had with Mr. Brian Higgins, who was at the waterfall and also at the residence on 34 Fairview because he was friends with his homeowner, Brian Albert. But he was also friends with Mr. O'Keefe and had also met the defendant. And throughout the course of those amorous text messages, there's references that the defendant makes to that incident in Aruba, as she purports it to be Mr. O'Keefe cheating on her. She insists that he was making out with Marietta Sullivan in that lobby as opposed to her giving him a hug.
Well,
And
do
makes
we have
repeated reference
CCTV?
to that within the contents of those.
Wait a minute. Do we have CCTV? Because women will do some shady behind poo. So did this chick not like her and she just wanted it to, you know, cause a disruption?
Text messages as well. Now, you'll hear testimony from a number of different other individuals. Mr. Michael Trotta, who has a supervisory role with Canton Department of Public Works. You'll hear from Mr. Louis Jutras, who has a supervisory role with regard to IT, in regard to certain video that was recovered from the town of Canton, as well as from a temple located along the route that the defendant traveled.
Also, wasn't that
both away from
that
Fairview
footage
that
something
evening,
the
as
defense
well
was waiting
as,
for,
to
that the
Fairview
state
from
slow
Waterfall,
walked?
away from Fairview to Mr. O'Keefe's residence on Meadows, and then later in the morning at 5 a.m. Because if you recall, Ms. McCabe, I anticipate, will testify that she receives the call from the defendant about 4:53 in the morning. The defendant then drives around Canton for some perceptible half-hour or so period of time prior to even getting to Ms. McCabe's house. And what I submit the evidence, or what I anticipate the evidence will show, based on sort of the tracking of her phone records, testimony you'll hear from Lieutenant Brian Tully of the state police, from these Volti records and RTT accounts, that the defendant, while she's using her phone, is driving in the direction of Fairview Road prior to going to.
Are you going to give her a
Mrs.
ticket
McCabe's
for
house,
not
where she
using
meets Ms.
hands-free?
McCabe and Ms. Roberts. Now, again, you'll hear testimony from a number of different troopers who were involved in the investigation. With regard to this case, you'll hear from Trooper Michael Proctor and Sergeant Yuri Buchanan of the State Police. You'll hear from Lieutenant Brian Tully. You'll hear some testimony from Trooper Joseph Hall, who's in a specialized unit within the State Police called PARS for short, but essentially a collision analysis and reconstruction section within the Massachusetts State Police. His examination of the vehicle, his examination of the scene, his examination of specifically some Toyota texture, because Lexus is essentially owned by Toyota or vice versa. So there is some data that he's able to recover from that and back the
I
vehicle
am
up
sorry,
based on
Tammy,
its
I have
known
not been
locations and travel.
watching
He cycles, and essentially opines,
the chat.
anticipate he'll opine that around 12:45 in the morning, when the vehicle was in front of the residence on Fairview, that for some perceptible period of time, that vehicle
I think
traveled
she was
over
actually
60 feet
talking
in
about
reverse
Kiwi
at over
Green,
20,
who
approximately
sent that
24.2
weird
miles
thing
per hour.
in.
Now, you'll hear testimony, as I said, from a number of different troopers, as well as from a number of different analysts from different labs. Included within that is Ms. Maureen Hartnett, who collected items from the vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, including the taillights, sort of housing from that vehicle, pieces of the taillight that were discovered in sort of the front grass, front street area. There is a specialized team called the CERT team. You'll hear from Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara, who has a supervisory role in relation to that. And then later on that day of the 29th, he, along with Lieutenant Tully and a number of different members from his CERT team, were searching for evidence within the mounds of snow in front of that house, as the blizzard is still ongoing at this point through sort of the afternoon hours. Among the items that they locate is a sneaker. When Mr. O'Keefe is transported to the hospital, he's found to only have one sneaker on his feet. They find the other sneaker in that area of the body. They find various pieces of taillight. And as is wont to do, over the course of the following days, the temperatures rise, there's a rainstorm that comes in, and the snow melts. Over those successive days, there are additional pieces of taillights that are eventually discovered in that area of the front lawn of the street. Now, from these different pieces, Ms. Hartnett also locates a cocktail glass that's located on the bumper or the rear area of that scene, and she locates a human hair on the back of that defendant's vehicle as well. Now,
Wait,
the cocktail glass
okay.
on the bumper.
So thus far, the human hair, and Tammy, I think she was talking about Kiwi. I don't know where she came from or what she was wanting to sell, but the hair is the only thing that I've heard thus far that is concrete evidence. I've heard a lot of people will tell me stuff, and having done just a cursory look, I don't know that I can trust any of these people telling me stuff. So the hair on the bumper, if it is what it's purported to be, that's more compelling to me as a juror. I wish he would have. Well, and Jess, I've heard conjecture of different things, but as a layperson coming in, the hair would be the one thing I would kind of take note of just myself, because a lot of the other things are this person's going to tell you and this person's going to tell you, and I don't know how I can test their veracity. And we're speeding
You
him
also
up
see
because he is just
surveillance
so
video from the
boring.
waterfall. And Mr. O'Keefe is observed on that surveillance video essentially walking out of the waterfall with a cocktail glass in his right hand. Same right hand that has minor injuries to it, and the same right hand that's attached to his right arm that has the abrasions and lacerations that are observed by the paramedics, that are observed by the doctors at Good Samaritan, and are observed by the medical examiner as well. We'll hear testimony from another analyst, Christina Hanley, about the forensic consistency between a drinking glass that was in the defendant's bumper and the drinking glass pieces that were found on scene at 34th Avenue. You'll hear her
Notice the
testimony in
word
regard to
consistency and not
pieces
the
of red and
same
clear plastic
as.
that were microscopic in size, that were
can't-
found within Mr. O'Keefe's clothing. Consistent, in her opinion, I anticipate she testified with the same pieces of plastic contained within the defendant's taillight. You'll hear from Ashley Valley, who works for the lab as well, and how she fit the various pieces of broken taillight from the scene together and over that taillight housing, finding them to be consistent with each other as well. You'll hear testimony from Andre Porto, who does essentially DNA analyst for the lab, and samples that were DNA samples that were taken from the taillight, from the clothes of Mr. O'Keefe, broken drinking glass that were consistent with Mr. O'Keefe. Those items were also sent, the taillight pieces, taillight DNA was also sent to the independent lab, Bodie Technologies, located in Northern Virginia. And you'll hear from an analyst there, Mr. Nicholas Bradford, indicating that the DNA on the defendant's taillight, in his opinion, is consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe.
That's the thing. Again, how can you make this is what killed me in history. How can you make like a giant battle full of, raging Germanic people and the Roman army boring AF? You have a potential for a jealous love triangle woman who carelessly leaves her police officer hero boyfriend in the snow. I mean, come on, it's just acting. It won't hurt you a lot of bit. Maybe. I don't know.
And inconsistent with Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Buchanan, who were the two preliminary investigators and primary investigators when it came to this case. You'll also hear from this test chart from that Bodie Laboratories in regard to some mitochondrial DNA that she examined in regard to that hair that Ms. Hartnett found on the bumper of the car, and her opinion that it was consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe as well.
But mitochondrial DNA is for all siblings. It's not as
Lastly,
definitive
you'll also
as
hear from Dr. Irene Sportibello and Dr. Renee Stonebridge of the
DNA from the nucleus.
in regard to their various examinations. Dr. Stonebridge is a neuropathologist. She essentially examines brain findings. Dr. Irene Sportibello is a forensic pathologist who does the sort of autopsy and medical examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body. You'll hear about the variety of sort of injuries that she observed over Mr. O'Keefe's body from him. In particular, you'll hear testimony in regards to lacerations to the right back of his head. You'll hear testimony in regards to an initial sort of skull fracture that occurs to the back of his head, and then sort of a radiating skull fracture that goes throughout his skull, which then leads to
welcome,
subdural
crime
hemorrhage,
spies.
essentially bleeding on the brain and then swelling of the brain, which then causes a condition called ecchymosis, which then sort of leads to the swelling of both of Mr. O'Keefe's eyes, as was observed by the initial
Oh,
results.
congratulations, Phoenix Fire. What's the name?
You will hear various testimony about sort of issues in regard to his
And
pain,
the
how that's
style.
indicative of hypothermia. Now, again, as I said, this is the first of two times that I have an opportunity to address you directly. And I thank you very much for your attention today, and I thank you for the anticipation of your close attention as we go through all of the witnesses and all the
Hello,
evidence.
JD.
That second time that I do get to address you, what I'll be asking you to do, based on the evidence, and again, as the board has instructed you, you are the sole arbiters of the facts of this case. You are the ones who find what the facts, and I reiterate that, the facts, and what the evidence demonstrates in this case. And what I submit to you at that time, that second time, is that the only true and just verdict based on that is that the defendant Karen is guilty of murder in the second degree, striking the victim, Mr. O'Keefe, with a car, knocking him back onto the ground, striking his head on the ground, causing the bleeding in his brain, swelling, and then leaving him there for several hours in a blizzard The temperature's in the teens, wind swirling around, snow piling up on his body until she comes with Mrs. McCabe and Mrs.
Wait,
Roberts.
now you
just after
decide to
6
get a
months.
personality?
And that she's also guilty of vehicular manslaughter, operating under the influence of liquor, and that she's also guilty of agency after causing death. Thank you very much for listening.
All right,
She's
thank you,
just
Mr.
all the
Riley.
guilty.
Mr. Eddie?
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Okay, come on. Keep me awake, sir. Oh, Oreo is such a good name.
Karen Reed was framed. Her car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did.
Mic drop. And at least they have a judge that lets them put forward this evidence, unlike the Delphi case where any sort of third-party defense is verboten.
You will learn that it was no accident that John O'Keefe was found dead on the front lawn of 34th Fairview Road in Canton on January 29th of 2022. You will learn that at that address lived a well-known...
Oh, no. Sorry.
had close connections to the investigators in this case. Karen Reed was framed for a murder she did not commit. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As I previously told you, my name is David Yannetti. I'm an attorney with an office in Boston. Together with attorneys Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little, it is truly my privilege and my honor to represent Karen Reed during this trial.
I will say that it was good that she went with a professional, a very charismatic lawyer from the area. So he understands the quirks of everything. I think that's some of, well, besides being a massive, dingleberry, B. Ivory Lamar had a lot of issues. So getting a lawyer that understands kind of the culture and the language and juries is really smart. Okay, I'm listening.
From a very early juncture in this case, you will question the Commonwealth's theory of the case. You will question the quality of the Commonwealth's evidence. You will question the veracity of the Commonwealth's witnesses. And you will question their shoddy and biased investigation, a faulty investigation that led to Karen Reed sitting here today. You will learn, in short, that the police did no real investigation of this case, and you will question why. You'll question why the investigators had such tunnel vision. You'll question why they focused solely on Karen Reed, someone with no ties to the Canton Police Department, as opposed to the well-known and well-connected Albert family of Canton, a family that was never treated as suspects by the investigators in this case. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found mortally injured on Brian Albert's front lawn. His body was in full view and almost right below Brian Albert's bedroom window on his front lawn. He was found wearing only one sneaker. You'll learn that Brian Albert was a Boston police officer as well, and that he was a trained first responder. Brian Albert was notified that another police
Yes,
officer was injured
dingleberry
and
is a term of
unresponsive
art
on his
when I
front
can't
lawn.
say schmuck.
And Brian Albert did nothing. His sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and other civilians were on his property that morning after John O'Keefe's body was found. Police, EMTs, firefighters, police cruisers, and an ambulance, fire truck, lights flashing. And first responder Brian Albert never came out of his house. Equally important for you will be the fact that the lead homicide investigators never went inside the Albert home that night. You'll learn that Brian Albert's brother, Kevin Albert, is a Canton police officer. It was obvious very early on that the Canton police should not be investigating the death of a man found on the property of the brother of a Canton police officer. So it was decided just about from the start that the Massachusetts State Police should take complete control of this investigation because the Canton police were conflicted out. Now, that sounded good at the time, but you'll learn that two major problems arose. First, despite the fact that they obviously had a conflict of interest, the evidence will show that the Canton police still had their hands in this investigation. You will find it astounding. The Canton police officer, Kevin Albert, the reason for the crime in the first place was continually updated about the status of this investigation while it was going on. Second, and equally troubling, is
If
that
he's a witness, that's
the
really
lead
bad.
state police detective
think.
who was assigned to this case was a man named Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor, you will learn, many people in Canton with deep ties to the Albert family. Michael Proctor's own mother refers to the Alberts as the Proctor's second family.
Okay, question. How does that happen? And what do you do when you're a crime lord in a small Massachusetts town? No idea.
His own sister's wedding. Michael Proctor was in the wedding party with Colin Albert. And he sat at the head table of that wedding with members of the Albert family. That's chosen to lead the investigation into the suspicious death on the property of Brian Albert. That's the man who gave updates to Canton Police Officer Kevin Albert, while the state police were supposed to be investigating what had occurred at his brother Brian Albert's house. You'll learn that right from the jump, Michael Proctor predetermined the outcome of this case. Never stepped foot inside the Albert home on January 29th, 2022. Never checked out whether there were any signs of struggle inside that home. He never called the crime scene technicians and other specialists to look for blood or other.
Okay, another thing I'm noticing because I'm listening more, pay attention to his out because he sounds a little Canadian. Not that that's important, but I thought I'd share what I noticed.
Other trace evidence within the home. He never asked Brian Albert for permission to go in the home and take a look around. Michael Proctor never applied for a search warrant to go in that home. Instead, he focused immediately and exclusively on Karen Reed, the outsider. You will learn that no one in the Proctor family has ever called the Reed family their second family. No one in the Proctor family had been in a wedding party with anyone from the Reed family. Karen Reed was a convenient outsider. She was most definitely not from Canton. How did Michael Proctor feel about her? How did he treat somebody he was investigating at a point in time when he should have been keeping an open
Welcome,
mind,
Derek.
focusing on obtaining all
Phoenix.
possible evidence so that he didn't
Oreo
miss
sounds like
anything?
she's having a grand time.
Well, you will learn that on the very day that John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn, Michael Proctor was texting with his high school buddies about this supposedly secret investigation, using his personal cell phone. He was revealing information about this investigation to his friends, assuming that nobody would ever find out what he was doing and what he was.
What? And I cannot stress this enough. The actual flipping flapjacks. I mean, Judge Gull would have had these guys, I don't know, hoisted on their own petard at this point. I don't think you can be the Hardy Boys if you're told that this is a conflict of interest and you shouldn't do it. I mean, call me crazy.
Saying. And he was revealing his true thoughts about Karen Reed to his friends, not what he put in his sanitized police reports, his true feelings to his friends whom he trusted, and in text messages that he never thought would come into the hands of the defense in this case. Lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor, right from the start, called Karen Reed names he would reserve only for your worst enemies. He told his friends that he hoped that
Or
she
your
would kill
best
herself.
friends. Okay, that's
He told his
gross.
friends that he had seized her cell phone. And you will learn that he knew he shouldn't have been accessing any content on her cell phone because he knew there would likely be attorney-client communications on between Karen and me at that time. He knew that he was supposed to wait for a search warrant or other permission from a judge in order to go through that phone. But you'll learn that he went through the phone anyway, without permission.
Wait.
And you'll know that he did.
So did the judge not mark this as fruit of a poisonous tree? If he got the phone without a search warrant, aren't any of the messages that are on there fruit of the poison tree, or was this something in limine that was taken care of? I am making, let me pull out and see if I can make it biggerized. I can at least. So it is supposed to be this picture over here. It would be my favorite lesbians from Sailor Moon. Oddly enough, So this couple right here is, I find, more heartwarming than Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask, because it seemed romantic when I first started it, y'all, but now looking at it as a mom, Sailor Moon is in middle school, Tuxedo Mask is in college. That's a no-go. So I've taken my stand and given it to Sailor, Neptune and Uranus, and just say they are the most adult relationship that's on that show. But I still like the fact that the hero is a spaz who falls down all the time, cries a lot, and eats a bunch of food.
Because he told his high school buddies that he was searching her phone for nude photos of Karen Reed. And he was disappointed he hadn't found any yet. That is the professional and unbiased investigator who was chosen to lead the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. You will learn that one of Michael Proctor's high school friends commented to him that with a dead body on the front lawn, the homeowner in this case is surely going to catch a lot of grief. And you know what Michael Proctor's response to that was? One word. Nope.
Nah.
And he explained why. Michael Proctor assured his buddies that the homeowner would not catch a lot of grief because, quote, the homeowner's a Boston cop too.
I'm sorry, Squab Bob. This week has seemed interesting. Feels like a whole week of Mondays sometimes.
And that one sentence, ladies and gentlemen, in Michael Proctor's own words, will explain a lot to you about how this investigation was conducted. You will be able to evaluate whether Trooper Michael Proctor treated Brian Albert and his family differently because of who they are and their relationships between his family and theirs. You will evaluate whether this investigation was on the up and up. You will decide, as a result, how valuable or worthless the prosecution's DNA evidence is or is not, in light of who controlled that evidence. You will learn that Michael Proctor's fingerprints are figuratively all over this case. His fingerprints are all over the Commonwealth's evidence.
Ew.
You will learn
If
that
he's
Michael
trying to
Proctor
find
showed up at
nudes, I don't
Karen
want
Reed's
his
parents'
fingers
house
anywhere
in
near
Dayton
me.
to interview her during the afternoon of January 29th, only hours after John O'Keefe's phone.
Oh Lord, Squab Bob, I was like 18 years pregnant with the youngest, most feral, and I went to see, I think, Toy Story 4, and, crying hysterically because all the toys go with Bonnie and they get new life and all this. I scared the giblets out of the attendant. He's like, "Are you in labor?" I was like, "They're all going to go to a new family. This is so great." Oh, he was like, and I usually don't cry at movies. I'm usually quite stoic, or I tell Mr. Mo something to make him laugh, because sad is not an emotion that I do well. But yeah, I think I might have made that man never want to have children.
Body was found dead on Brian Albert's front lawn. You'll learn that Michael Proctor had her Lexus SUV towed from her parents' home. But you'll also learn that he wrote a search warrant in which he falsified the time that he took that SUV. He swore under oath that the vehicle wasn't towed until 5:30 p.m. But you'll learn that we obtained surveillance footage that he didn't know we would get. And that surveillance footage exposed that Michael Proctor's words in that sworn affidavit were a lie. Michael Proctor had that vehicle for about 90 minutes before he claimed to have taken it. And folks, you will learn that the timing is important, very important. Because when John O'Keefe was first found on Brian Albert's front lawn, the police thoroughly searched that yard for potential evidence. And it wasn't just one officer, or two, or three. There were at least 4 officers that searched that front lawn.
That's the hard thing.
Not
When
only
I'm
was the
focusing on
beginning
the
of a
cross stitch, I
snowstorm, but
can't
there
see the
wasn't that much
blessed
snow
closed
on the ground
captions.
when they were searching that lawn. It was light out by the time they did the search, and it was getting lighter. And during that thorough search of Brian Albert's front lawn, the number of pieces of tail light that were found by a minimum of 4 officers looking for evidence was 0. It was only later in the day, when the snow was really starting to accumulate, that the police miraculously started to find pieces of tail light on the property. The police only started to find pieces of tail light after Michael Proctor had seized Karen Reed's car. They only started to find pieces of taillight after Michael Proctor had possession of her taillight. You'll learn that Trooper Michael Proctor then kept going back to the Albert residence after that day, and he claims to have kept finding pieces of taillight on multiple occasions on multiple different days. And in addition, a good week after John O'Keefe's death, Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz, an older officer on the brink of retirement with probably not the best eyesight, he supposedly was.
This is an investigation worthy of Delphi. Holy God. Did anyone... And welcome, Fox Raiders. You are just watching me doing some cross-stitch and listening to the opening statements with the full caveat that I have paid very little attention to this. So I will ask questions of the chat, and I'm just trying to be a casual observer. I do tend to skew more to the defense, but I'm willing to listen to the state if they can convince me they have the evidence.
Happened to be driving past Brian Albert's house. And by the way, Brian Albert is someone with whom Chief Berkowitz is also good friends. And this older man allegedly spotted yet another piece of taillight from his moving vehicle. This was yet another piece of taillight that was somehow missed by the trained specialists who had previously and thoroughly searched the property. Another piece of taillight that Proctor supposedly missed in the many times he went back to the property. Michael Proctor
How many
claims
gazillion
they kept finding
pieces
pieces of taillight
did this
right up until
taillight
February 18th
have?
of 2022, which was
Like
nearly
the
3
Shroud
weeks
of Turin.
after John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's home. You will learn that there is no competent evidence that Karen Reed's taillight shattered at Brian Albert's property in the early morning hours of January 29th of 2022. To the contrary, you'll learn that when Karen left John at Brian Albert's house, she drove back to John's house on Meadows Ave across town in Canton. At John's home, where he lived with his 2 adopted children, Karen was drifting in and out of sleep, but she woke up for good in a panic sometime around 4 a.m. because John hadn't come home. And that was not like him at all. He had never done that before. Karen had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. Something was seriously wrong. So she got back into her Lexus. She backed up out of the garage to leave the driveway. And when she did, the right rear taillight of her Lexus struck John's parked vehicle in the driveway, and her taillight cracked. That was the same taillight that the prosecution now claims was broken outside the Albert residence hours earlier at 12:30 a.m. But we have video evidence that the taillight was actually broken at 5 a.m., many hours after the prosecution needs that taillight to have been broken. There is, of course, no video of the taillight being broken at Brian Albert's house. You will eventually conclude that that's because the taillight was not broken there. Importantly, you will learn that there was an eyewitness who arrived at 34 Fairview after Karen got there with John O'Keefe in the early morning hours of January 29th. And that eyewitness, Brian Nagel, who's the brother of Julie Nagel, who was at the after-hours party that night. He had a clear view of Karen's SUV. Brian Nagel confirms that there was no damage.
Were they not allowed to have demonstratives? Because I need... This story has more layers than Dune. I need charts. I'll probably look at charts that have been put in Baker's stuff, but holy God, this is the amount of names they assume that you're familiar with is that. Oh, and yes, I will check that out. Thank you. I have been trying to keep up with Delphi and 6 children, 1 husband who is, helping every weekend with his mother-in-law. So he's out of the house. So, and end of school stuff. So I've been a little preoccupied, but I will definitely check that out to learn things.
To her taillight at that time. Karen was sitting in the driver's seat with her hands at 10 and 2. And Ryan Nagel confirms that while Karen was inside the car, John O'Keefe was not. John O'Keefe was also not outside the car at that time. You will ultimately conclude there's only one other place he could have been. Now, going back to that 5 a.m. video from John's driveway, you will see Karen back up her Lexus and strike John's car at about 5 a.m. when she was leaving John's house to go out to look for him. And you will know that she struck his car at 5 a.m. because you will watch that video closely. You will witness that the wheels and the hubcaps on John's car are jostled and moved by Karen's SUV. and you will conclude that that video depicts exactly when Karen's taillight was cracked, long after she dropped off John that night at 34 Fairview. And you will learn that part of the reason that
I will say I'm probably gonna cut this off for right now because I want to pay attention. But I will say, like the Delphi defense, I like that he is using discovery to back up his claims, because it is not it is a sort of big ask for a jury to believe that government could even pull off a conspiracy without shenanigans, because has anyone been to the DMV? But by giving me your facts from discovery, that helps me a little bit to say, okay, this could be plausible, versus this is just a crazy, conspiracy that we're pulling out of our back end. So I will say that both the Delphi and this defense seem to have really done their homework and are using facts, not just conjecture and hearsay.
Karen's Lexus hit John's car was that Karen was panicked at that time. Where is John? Why didn't he come home? What happened to him? And you will learn that she was racking her brain for what possibly could have happened. And like many of us, was worried about the worst. Did I
Excuse me. I know. I wanted to approach this case kind of like a noob, mostly because I didn't have time, and it sounds much better than I didn't have time. But also because I want to maybe have and be that kind of voice that says, as a onlooker who hasn't looked at this, what am I more likely to believe? Who am I more likely to be persuaded by? That is a terrible pause. Your eyes do look a bit red, sir, so I will unpause you.
hit him? Could I have hit him? That was what she was saying, both to herself and to other people later that morning when she went back to 34 Fairview. She couldn't think of anything else that made sense. She certainly didn't consider in a million years that someone from within the Albert home could have beaten up John and left him to die on the front lawn. Now, that was over 2 years ago. Karen didn't know then what you will learn during this trial. Karen didn't know that Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house sometime after Karen pulled away. She didn't know that after Jennifer McCabe dropped off some people elsewhere, she returned to her own home. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe climbed some stairs in her home and eventually made it into her bedroom with her cell phone. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe settled in at 2:27 in the morning on January 29, 2022, and typed a Google search that she would later delete. 2:27 in the morning was over 3 hours before John O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's lawn. 2:27 was over 3 hours before anyone knew or suspected that John O'Keefe was missing or hurt or in trouble. And at 2:27 in the morning, you will learn that with no one watching her, thinking she was alone with her thoughts, not worrying that anyone would know what she was doing, Jennifer McCabe typed in the following Google search: how long to die in the cold? Now, she misspelled the first word, so the actual search was how long to die in the cold, but you'll get the point. You will ask yourself, why would somebody Google how long does it take for someone to die in the cold, unless that person knew
3
someone
a.m. me does a lot of
who
crazy
either was in
stuff.
that situation or would be in that situation. You will question during
Teal glitter light up roller skates. That's all I have to say about that. Look, 3 a.m. me, I'm more inclined to give grace to 3 a.m. me. Oh, awesome. I will look into her. I definitely am interested, but I kind of want to watch this case with kind of like the jury, that they don't get all of this extra time to prejudge this. I kind of wanted to be maybe that voice of, this is how I feel about it as a person that hasn't been completely immersed in the case. I can't do that with Delphi, so this was a kind of case I could do that. Oh, I'm sure. Like I know there's Turtle Boy, and there's a bunch of people who have been following this from the beginning, and I like the groundswell of support of innocent until proven guilty, with even with the law and crime people on the Delphi, and then this case, law and crime is usually skewed towards the state, and seeing them being able to kind of change public perception with pointing out these lackluster investigations. It really is amazing. This is the kind of lawyering that I find really, really exciting. The ability to be compelling, to get your point across, but also, again, use facts and evidence.
During this trial, who was it who actually did die in the cold at
That's a
some
really
point
good
that night?
attitude.
Sometime after Jen McCabe was asking Google for an answer to her question. And you'll learn that the answer to that question was John O'Keefe. The medical examiner in this case will testify that one of the causes of John O'Keefe's death was hypothermia. John O'Keefe died in part because he was left to die in the cold. Now,
Okay.
the Commonwealth will
So, quick question. I'm guessing blunt force trauma to the head causing cranial swelling or brain swelling and then hypothermia. And I have seen the autopsy photos. Those do not strike me personally as car crash sort of injuries, but I'm not an expert. So I will say that I lean more towards the defense, but the fact that, again, as a big ask, as he's telling me that the entire town, or basically the entire police force, decided to frame her, he has evidence to back it up, and that is what I like, because I need evidence to back it up.
try to dispute the timing of that Google search. They'll try to claim that there were only 2 Google searches at 6:23
Yeah,
and
that does
6:24 a.m.
seem
after
really
John's body was found. But one problem for the Commonwealth.
Again, what is I I am not a lawyer, y'all, but isn't there a concept called fruit of the poison tree, where if they got something, they finagled it without a warrant, or the warrant was incorrect and gotten in bad faith, then any evidence collected from that certain item is fruit of a poisonous tree? I mean, I thought that was a thing, but I only watched Legally Blonde like 100 times.
Will be that we have retained Richard Green, one of the leading computer forensic experts in the country. Rick Green has forensically analyzed
that's
Jennifer McCabe's phone,
good.
both manually and using every appropriate type
Thank you,
of computer
Rhonda, and
software
beautiful cat.
to solve this issue. Rick Green will confirm for you that Jennifer McCabe did indeed make that search at 2:27 a.m. And another problem for the Commonwealth is that you will hear and see other evidence that will confirm that
thank
Jennifer
you.
McCabe is lying when she denies making that Google.
I will say these streams are probably going to be higgledy-piggledy around, because I am getting end of school stuff, I am getting 6 children stuff, so it will probably be like in 1 hour spurts or a couple witnesses at a time, so she will probably be, adjudicated one way or the other before I finish this, but I go at my own pace. As you can tell, it's taken me almost an hour and 30 minutes to get an hour and 57 minutes into the stream.
Search at 2:27 a.m. You will conclude that before she went to bed, if she went to bed that night, Jennifer McCabe wanted to know just how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. And a big question in this trial for you will be, when was John O'Keefe left to die in the cold? I expect the Commonwealth will try to persuade you that he was left there sometime around 12:30 a.m. because they're going to try to prove to you that Karen Reed hit him and that his body stayed there the entire night until first responders arrived at 6 a.m. and his body was taken to the hospital. But you will learn that there are big problems with the Commonwealth's theory of this case. You will learn that there were 6 people at that after-hours party at Brian Albert's house, all of whom left by the front door and would have been confronted by John O'Keefe's lifeless body on that lawn if
I'm muted. Sorry. Boomer moment. Okay, this doesn't compute. The state wants me at the same time to believe that he was clearly and visible and on wet grass with very little sticking snow. But they also want us to think that none of the people in this very busy house having a teenage party or a young adult party, an adult afters party, didn't see this man. So Karen had to see him and run away from him for part of the conviction to stick. But there was no responsibility of the people in the house. Or they didn't see him. Look, but then again, I live in a family that will throw laundry on the floor and assumes that a laundry fairy comes up or can't see, a fork left out or something like that. So maybe they were all just in kid mode, kid cleaning mode.
He was actually there at that time. Those 6 people walked out the front door to 34 Fairview, walked to their cars, either in the driveway or parked in front of the house. Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, was there. Her husband, Matthew McCabe, was there. ATF federal agent Brian Higgins was there, who was also Brian Albert's friend.
Thank you for
Sarah
listening.
Levinson, a friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there.
Quid pro quo.
Julie Nagel, another friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. And Caitlin Albert, Brian Albert's daughter, was also there. All of them leaving the residence. Each of those people left 34 Fairview in Canton, where Brian Albert lived. Each of them walked out facing the front lawn, where the Commonwealth will tell you that a 6'2", nearly 220-pound big man in dark clothing was sprawled on the front lawn when there was only a dusting of white snow on the ground. He was supposedly sprawled on that lawn, just feet from where these people were walking when they left the residence. And you will learn that not one of these people saw John O'Keefe laying. Not one. And you know who else saw no one laying outside in the early morning hours of January 29th? The snowplow driver in charge of plowing the street for the city of Canton. And this is another big problem for the Commonwealth. You will learn that Michael Proctor, here's that name again, wrote a report where he claimed that the
Okay, again, so this is where as a jury member, I would be getting doubt, because he makes a good point that these people are walking in and out of the house and they didn't notice someone. It's just very odd. If you gave this script to Hollywood, they would tell you that, it's too fantastical to believe. That's like the Delphi thing. It's too fantastical for Hollywood, but it just might be real life. It's very odd, at least to me.
DPW supervisor had told him that Fairview Road had not been plowed that night. Proctor's total investigation on this issue consisted of one phone call and no follow-up. He just submitted his report that simply said the road hadn't been plowed that night, perhaps thinking that no one else would follow up either. But you'll learn that when it came to finding out the truth, it's not that Proctor couldn't find the truth, it's that he wouldn't. But fortunately, you'll learn that we would, and we did.
Oh, on that note, if I'm going to try to set up my own Discord this weekend, which will be hilarious, but I would love to watch, I Know My Name is Steven, because his brother, oh gosh, what's his name? Carrie Stainer went on to become a serial unaliver. And it's very, very interesting and will probably be a story that I cover. And be on the lookout. By the end of the month, I want to put out my first Indiana Weird kind of story time episode thing. I'm trying some new stuff. So be on the lookout for that. It will be Gertrude Banaszewski as the first sort of, person we highlight in her crimes.
You'll learn that within weeks after January 29th, we sent our investigator, a former Medford police officer named Paul Makowski, to the Canton DPW to try to get to the bottom of this. Paul Makowski talked to the same supervisor at the DPW, a man named Michael Trotta, whom Proctor claimed had told him that the street hadn't been plowed that night. You'll learn that Paul Makowski found out that Michael Proctor was not telling the truth. You'll learn that Michael Trotta from the DPW told Paul Makowski, our investigator, that the street was indeed plowed that night, and that the name of the plow driver was Brian Laughlin. So Paul Makowski tracked down Brian Laughlin. He asked Mr. Laughlin if the state police or any investigators had ever spoken to him. And the answer came back, no. You will then learn what Brian Laughlin had to say about what he saw and didn't see that night.
Other question, and you guys probably know, the older couple that's right behind him, are those Karen's parents? Yeah, I would. Oh, okay. I will definitely put that up, and then you might want to see if they have a GoFundMe or anything. Oh, Ghost Ray, um I will it will depend a lot on I have to go get blood work done and what's going on there. Okay, I was wondering if they were John's parents because he looks very irritated by everything the defense is saying, and she looks like she's just hanging on, and I feel awful for the parents that if Karen gets off, if it is shown that they did a shoddy police work, then that is a double betrayal by this police force. The fact that, they did such a shoddy job, tried to get someone on there and gave them hope that they were going to find justice. That's the part I find icky about this case and the Delphi case is if there's not enough evidence, but you just wanted someone to pin something on, it goes to trial and then it wastes time, it gets their hopes up, and then people wonder like they do all the time when they haven't watched the whole case, how this person miraculously got off. It's just very heartbreaking to me.
And you will be shocked. Brian Laughlin told Paul Makowski.
That's what I also, I felt so bad for them when I heard that they not only lost their son John, but they lost their daughter, their son-in-law. The tragedy that has been visited on this family is just unbelievable. And the fact that they're sitting there, shows a great amount of love, loyalty, and strength.
That he was driving a big snowplow in Canton that night. You'll learn that the nickname for it at the DPW was Frankenstein because it had a lot of spare parts and it had been around forever. Brian Laughlin told Paul Makowski that when he plows the streets of Canton in Frankenstein, he's very...
Fun Dying, did they ask or did they give a reason why, or was it just kind of a courtesy thing that they asked for? Okay, what does this say? John's dad is for the defense. Mom and brother are not supporting her. His dad is on the defense witness list. Okay, I can understand the inclination to just get the easy answer and have something happen and get justice or something for your child. So, I don't know how I would react, and they are acting with a lot more grace than I think I would. So I applaud them immensely.
Careful. He makes sure to check not only the roads in front of him, but also the yards to the side of his plow. He makes sure not to hit a fire hydrant or a tree or an animal, or heaven forbid, a person lying in the snow. He's always on the lookout. You'll learn that Brian Laughlin passed by 34 Fairview in his plow, traveling right by Brian Albert's front lawn at 2:30 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Laughlin confirms that at about 2:30, when he went by that house, John O'Keefe was not on that front lawn. So you'll learn that about 2 hours after the Commonwealth claims that Karen Read somehow incapacitated John O'Keefe, an eyewitness confirms that not only could it not have happened.
Okay, I will have to look at it.
But you'll learn that Brian Laughlin also provides some other...
I'm going to push him up, not because I don't like hanging out with you guys, but because I'm getting close to, well, no, I'm getting close to when it's time to pick up youngest, most feral children, but we will get through.
Troubling testimony for the Commonwealth.
And thank you, Ghost
You'll
Ray.
learn that
I'll
after
look at
making
that
that
when I
pass at
come back.
2:30 in the morning and seeing no body, he showed up again at the entrance to Fairview Road, intending to make another pass down it with his plow. This time, however, at about 3:30 in the morning, he looked down the street and he saw that parked right next to Brian Albert's front lawn right in the very area where John O'Keefe's body was later found at 6 a.m., Brian Laughlin saw a Ford Edge parked on the side of the road. You will learn that the police have done zero investigation to discover whose Ford Edge that was. You'll learn that members of the Albert family drove Ford Edges. You'll learn that the police to this day claim not to know who was parked right next to the area where John O'Keefe's body was later found. You will learn that while investigators on this case, including Mike Prock, completely ignored the snowplow driver who went right by the Albert residence, the defense not only tracked him down and interviewed him, but the plow driver actually took our investigator on a ride back past the residence to explain the precise route that he had taken on January 29th. You'll learn that some other curious things were going on in the early morning hours of January.
No, I really wanted to pay attention, and while I can pick up different things, if I'm passively listening, I tend to pick up a lot of things, but I want to be able to comment and see the comments, because this was the part that everyone's like, he's dropping all the facts. He's, this is really interesting. It's a mic drop. So I wanted to give it the proper attention. I did not finish my angry sewing. No.
29. Curious things that the police in this case utterly failed to investigate. For example, after people left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house on January 29, Brian Albert claimed that he had no contact with anyone but his wife until he was woken up in the morning. But you will learn that he was ultimately confronted by the fact that his phone records revealed that he had actually placed a phone call to ATF agent Brian Higgins, his friend, the same friend who had been at his house earlier that night. And that was at 2:22 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Higgins called him back 17 seconds later, and they connected for 22 seconds on their cell phones. You'll be asked to consider just how long 22 seconds is and what could be said and discussed during that long of a phone call. You will consider that phone call in the context of the other curious.
For now, I'm simply trying to take things in, and I'll probably start writing notes because, as I said, I am the world's worst person with names. So I will probably make my own murder chart. I do have, and I will be purchasing with some of my fund money, a standing whiteboard. I have the murder board over there, but it helps me if I can write it down in my handwriting. I seem to retain it better. So I might just print out pictures and have them on the whiteboard because good night, nurse. This is murder board central.
Things that were going on during the early morning hours of January 29th. You will learn about the following in
for the love
chronological
of
order.
Lemmy.
2:12 a.m., Jennifer McCabe arrives at her home. 2:22 a.m., Brian Albert calls Brian Higgins. 2:22 a.m., 17 seconds later, Higgins calls him back. And Brian Albert and Brian Higgins are on the phone together for 22 seconds. 2:23 a.m., Jennifer McCabe climbs the stairs to her bedroom. 2:27 a.m., Jennifer McCabe searches on Google how long to die in the cold.
Here's my here's my question. What was the underlying reason? And if you guys don't know, if it hasn't been revealed yet, that's fine. Then what was the underlying reason that they went after him? Because I guess I'm wondering what prompted all the police officers to turn on him. Was he going to internal affairs? Was there already corruption that he was sort of whistleblowing about? It just seems odd that all of a sudden they decide to work in concert with each other to unalive him and frame someone else. But, I mean, people have done dumb things for less. Okay, so it's not been revealed. Okay, that's fine. I just, having not been on this case as much, I did wonder what was the precipitating kind of event that got them all upset. I suspect there was a physical altercation. They didn't intend to unalive him, but did, and once he was passed away, they had to cover it. One of the other officers that are single wanted Karen, from what I understand. Interesting. Well, Okay, so there was some beef between him and Colin Albert, but it hasn't come out in the trial yet. It was suspected that it was a fight that got out of hand. Okay. I mean, that does make more sense with his knuckles being bruised to me. Again, not a doctorologist, but I would think that there would be more signs of things akin to road rash if he was backed into and slid across, the ground. There would be some patterning of scratches all over exposed skin because, I mean, he wasn't doing it kindly. He was doing it at 35 miles an hour. No, I used to do it for cases. I've just gotten into Newsy News, but it would be nice to bring that back as I'm working on research to bring Indiana weird crimes, little true crime stories to fruition. I have a lot of ideas. I just have to put work and focus on one of them instead of all the squirrels.
2:30 a.m., plow driver Brian Laughlin confirms there was no body on Brian Albert's front lawn. 3:30 a.m., Brian Laughlin confirms that a Ford Edge was parked right where John O'Keefe's body was later found. The Commonwealth will not be able to successfully dispute any of those facts, yet I expect that they will persist in asking you to convict Karen Read anyway. You will learn that there are other major problems with the Commonwealth's theory. You'll learn that when John O'Keefe was found, he did not look like he had been hit by a car.
Oh,
You'll learn that he looked to
okay.
have been attacked and beaten up. You'll learn that John O'Keefe was a large 6'2" man.
So as Fry is gone, but he had sharp puppy paw or claws. I mean, my arm looks like I have, well, I need therapy to be honest, but those looked more like dog either scratches or bites to me, but as a layperson, I don't quite know. So I'm glad that other people are seeing what I'm seeing. It gives me sort of not confirmation bias, but you know, if I'm connecting these patterns, I'm not the only one. Oh,
Who,
and the
if
feds
positioned
are
behind a Lexus
investigating.
SUV, would have had his
Yikes.
torso completely exposed to the rear of that vehicle, including to the taillight. You'll learn that no part of his torso was injured. There was no bruising, no ridges, no scratches, no punctures. You'll learn that his chest and hips and legs were pristine, despite the Commonwealth's contention that he was hit by a 6,000-pound vehicle. The evidence will show that what was not pristine was his right arm. You will take one look at that arm, and you will conclude that a car did not cause those injuries. The injuries to John O'Keefe's arm appear to be consistent with scratch marks and claw marks, marks that make it look as though an animal had attacked his arm. But you won't have to rely just on your common sense when you look at those photos. You'll hear from an expert forensic pathologist who is world-renowned, who has personally conducted thousands of autopsies. And he will testify that those marks are consistent with scratch and claw marks and bite marks from an animal, including a German Shepherd. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, Brian Albert's family dog, Chloe, was a German Shepherd. You'll learn that Brian Albert has admitted that this dog is not good around strangers. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, John O'Keefe would have...
That must be a German Shepherd thing because Fry bonded with me and anyone who was not me, he would get Twitter pated around. But, and to be honest, I wasn't a great trainer. I was way too lenient, and he might have been the alpha, but we were working on it. There are animals they couldn't catch that were left behind. Those animals were ducks, geese, and some chicken. What in the... Oh, okay, wait, sorry. That's for Texas. Yes, if you guys feel that you want to donate to help the animals, please do so. Okay, that makes more sense. Yes, Fry was okay, and it failed. Yeah, that's the thing. Look, I don't agree with Kristi Noem, but in more rural areas, if you have a dog that is unruly, generally you would take it to the vet or ask if it could be trained, and if that wasn't possible, then you would have to look at making hard choices because they aren't safe. So I, who in the hell told her to put that in a book is trying to destroy her? Or if that was her own idea, ma'am, you are stupid.
You've been a stranger to that dog. And you'll learn that Chloe had been the beloved family dog for the Alberts for 7 years. The Albert family loved Chloe. But strangely, as we discussed this dog today, the Albert family doesn't have its beloved Chloe anymore. You'll learn that Brian Albert was called to testify before the grand jury regarding this matter in April of 2022, and that he did testify about his German Shepherd, Chloe, during that grand jury testimony. And you'll learn that not long after that testimony, Brian Albert and his family rehomed their beloved family dog. They gave away their family dog, and Chloe, the German Shepherd, is therefore now gone. Now, the Commonwealth will try to take your attention away from all of these troubling facts and try to persuade you not to consider their shocking lack of investigation of anyone else, not to consider John O'Keefe's injuries, not to consider the fact that multiple people left the residence and saw no body, not to consider the fact that the snowplow driver was specifically looking at 2:30 a.m. and there was nobody there, not to consider the fact that
See, the things that stick out to me is the fact that people didn't see the body when there was only a light dusting of snow, and the snowplow person. And I swear to giblets, if they did something to Chloe, I will lose my honey badgering is just gonna be my new motto. Justice for Chloe. We better find that dog, and justice for John, because if they did a shitty job investigating this, then I want his mom to, I've seen her tear up. I want his mom to get justice. And right now, this investigation doesn't seem good at all.
people in the house were communicating at 2:22 a.m., but denied speaking to each other for 22 seconds, and not to consider the fact that one of their witnesses, who was also present at the home, was unusually curious at 2:27 a.m. about how long it would take for someone to die in the cold.
Yeah, that's
Commonwealth will
damning.
instead try to persuade you that Karen Reed supposedly had a motive to kill John O'Keefe because they were not getting along. You'll hear about their trip to Aruba over New Year's Eve and that Karen was upset that John had been flirting with another woman.
Yeah, I mean, who among us hasn't filled in their indoor pool, laid down new flooring, bleached the entire place, and got rid of their dog, in a blizzard? Make it plausible. Make it plausible. John Wick is fantastical, but it's grounded in reality a little bit. Whereas where people love their animals and will go ape on you if you hurt them. So yes, but this set of facts, you couldn't even sell this script to Hollywood. I mean, no one would believe that there is this incompetent of a investigation.
And you will hear that Karen considered exploring her options after that trip, which led her to a get-together at one point with ATF federal agent Brian Higgins, although that never went anywhere. But you'll also hear that in January of 2022, after the Aruba trip, and not long before January 28th and 29th, John O'Keefe was making long-term plans with Karen, including a family trip with her and the kids, and also another trip with Karen and another couple for months into the future. And you'll see video of how John and Karen were interacting on the night in question. You'll see for yourself how they looked at each other from the video at the waterfall that night. Nobody who saw them that night saw anything wrong. There was nothing wrong. I mean, like any couples, occasionally they would bicker or disagree. But you
They did get to the creepy man who was trying to find nudes on her phone, and you don't keep those on your phone. You delete them as soon as you make them and hope that the gods of internet magic will erase them from your phone's memory, or you factory reset your phone. I mean, that would be me if I did that.
will hear zero
Pull O.J.
evidence of
Simpson
any
away.
domestic violence in that home whatsoever. John never raised a hand in anger toward Karen, and Karen never raised a hand in anger toward John. That simply wasn't who they are. You will conclude the notion that Karen Reed chose the start of a snowstorm to suddenly become violent out of the blue for the first time and intentionally
Yeah,
kill her
you
boyfriend
would
by
think.
hitting him with her car and leaving him there with a house full of people inside is patently ridiculous. You will also learn that what's not ridiculous is that someone, not Karen Reed, ambushed John O'Keefe. Somebody probably didn't mean to kill him, but somebody went too far. You'll learn that Trooper Proctor failed to investigate motives
Yeah,
that
that's
other people had to harm John O'Keefe. You'll learn that Proctor failed to investigate
dang
anything
it.
or anyone who was in the Albert.
My rack is immortal somewhere on the internets. There you go. Since I'm running for president, I figured I'd just put that out there. I was young and dumb, but if you can find it, I mean, they hadn't been through 6 kids yet.
Residents that night. You'll learn that he failed to investigate the antagonistic relationship between members of the Albert family and John O'Keefe. You'll learn that apparently nobody investigates the Albert family of Canton.
Ooh.
Remember, on day one, Trooper Proctor was asked whether the homeowner, Brian Albert, would catch a lot of grief. And Trooper Proctor himself said, nope, homeowner's a Boston cop too. So folks, the trial is now about to start and the witnesses are about to start testifying. On behalf of Karen Reed, I ask that you do 2 things during this trial. First, I ask that you pay attention to all of the evidence. The way trials work, the prosecution gets to present its case first. They conduct their direct examinations first. So we respectfully ask that you wait for us. We will get to cross-examine their witnesses, and you will find that cross-examination is the key that unlocks the truth. Wait for us. We'll be glad that you did. Second, I ask that you keep your eye on the ball. You have one job and one job only to do during this trial, and that job, quite frankly, is not to solve this case. Your only job during this trial is to determine whether the Commonwealth, the prosecution, has proven to you each and every element of the crimes they have charged, beyond a reasonable doubt, to a moral certainty. The prosecution will fail to prove this case to a moral certainty. They will fail to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. You will reasonably doubt their case because their theory of the case does not make sense. You will reasonably doubt their case because Karen Reed was framed, and the evidence shows that, despite the fact that the police never ever investigated that angle of this case at all. Because the prosecution will not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty, we will stand before you again at the end of this trial and ask that you find Karen Reed not guilty.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay, I really, really like that. It kept me awake, which was good. And again, I like suppositions to be with fact. The state tried to pull on heartstrings, but his delivery was so dry, and quite honestly, it was so many names and so many different connections that he didn't have demonstratives. I don't know if that's something they discussed in, before the trial in a motion in limine, that they weren't going to have any, demonstratives for opening. But what this case really needs, is something that simplifies these connections. If the defense can show the reason and give direct evidence, I think that there's a very good chance that if you are an impartial juror, you will have some doubts, because I do have some doubts now. Now, it will depend on how they cross-examine. I will try to set up another Karen Reed stream for this weekend. But like I said, I have to go get some blood work done because the doctor is trying to figure out why I am swelling so much in my legs. I have thankles. I mean, I have surpassed Hillary Clinton in shapeless legs. So, and there's that alarm for me to go get the boy, children. So thank you for joining me and allowing me to ask questions and, kind of being my guide as a newbie on this, on this case, and joining me doing cross stitch. This is something I thought I was going to, I was thinking about before I kind of did the murder board thing and everything else. So I am pleasantly surprised that you guys just wanted, that's how I used to listen to the trials and just shout things out at my TV or my TV monitor. So I will see you all later. We will have Legal Shenanigans Theater tomorrow, Dude, Where's Mom and Dad? Where we start getting into the witnesses and finishing up the closing and getting into witnesses of the Chandler Holderson case. If you do like Mystery Science Theater or things like that, it's sort of a spoof on that with trials. So give that a try. It'll probably be around 3. I have to make sure with some people. But thank you all so much for joining me. Say something kind to yourself and try to say something kind to someone else. It is great. Have a great weekend. If I don't see you again until Monday, I will be on with Newsy News in the morning at 9 and at 7 p.m. I will see you all later. Bye, guys.